Why would he? Why would Jesus dine with tax collectors? Now, on one level, of course, they are precious in God's sight. They're people, they're human beings with souls and spirits and all this other thing. And certainly, Jesus wants to minister to them. But I think there's more to the story. So let's set the stage of the world in which Jesus lived. 90% of the people in Palestine were poor. They were functionally hungry. Okay, 10% were very wealthy, and all of their wealth came from the work of the poor. We have an agriculture, agrarian type of economy here. And so most of everything that's produced is produced by the 90%, okay? Yet they have very little to eat, and the rich get richer, and the poor get poorer. Now, death rates are very high in the poor sector. We have an average age of around 25 life expectancy. Sometimes, if you are in that group, you may live to 40 and 50. But with respect to the 10%, this is where we see many people living to 60 and 70. The life expectancy is very, very different for them. So Jesus sees the impact of such a disparity. He understands the mental and the physical toll on the people he is ministering to. He certainly continues to provide hope and healing, let's be clear. Of course he does. But he realizes that his ministry of compassion could never be enough. It doesn't change the conditions that lead to the dysfunction of poverty. You see, tax collectors play a major role in creating the injustice. Tax collectors largely come from the wealthy. They have licenses that are given to them by Rome to collect a certain amount of tax in their district, whatever that district is. But they have the freedom to charge whatever they want. Rome just wants to make sure they get their cut. They really don't care about the relationship of the tax collector and those who he's collecting taxes from. So what happens a lot is that these tax collectors gouge people. They gouge people. They gouge the poor. And that's a major problem. So this is when Jesus assesses his mission field and he makes a modest attempt to change the social, political, economic landscape of Palestine. It's a simple move. For him, tax collectors are the low-hanging fruit. And if he can get tax collectors to turn their hearts and minds to God, right, and this kind of, corruption will loosen, and the people will be able to retain more of their money, their wealth. Now, Jesus, first of all, Jesus always said to his disciples, everything I say comes from the Father, and that's true. But he also, he's kind of a Pharisee, and the Pharisees do broker in all the prophets. They understand all the prophets. And so his inspiration for a lot of ministry will come from the prophets, okay? Knowing that God owns everything. Now, it's important to underscore when we think about Jesus trying to re-engineer things, when we talk about economic justice, we're not saying everyone gets the same. That's not what anybody's saying, but what we are saying is everyone has enough. There's a big difference, so it could be a big disparity, but everyone has enough. Now, there are in Scripture 3,000 verses that deal with injustice to the poor. 3,000 verses. And that is 10% of the entire content of the Bible. There is nothing comes remotely close to an issue in the Bible than economic justice to the poor. Nothing comes close. When we say, economic justice or justice is in the Shalom, which it is, but let's take a look at compassion, 200 references in the Bible versus 3,000. Mercy, 300 references. Grace, 150, and forgiveness, 150. All very important, but holy cow, economic justice is the end game. It's the end game. And of course, he starts his ministry quoting Isaiah 6:61, verse 1. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor and bind up the brokenhearted. We could go on, but there's a verse. He starts his ministry that way in his hometown. He would certainly have reflected heavily on Micah chapter 6, verses 6 through 9, when God says, I have no interest in your worship unless you follow my teachings, unless you take care of the poor, unless you conduct all the elements of shalom, particularly the poor. I have no interest. I didn't fall off a turnip truck. Now, lots of other sectors of I just want to mention 1 Kings, 2 Chronicles, Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Micah. Lots of verses advocating for the poor directly to the rich, point blank. Many proverbs, lots of proverbs, warn the rich about oppressing the poor. Leviticus warns about the improper payment of workers. Amos states that judgment is coming because of the unfair treatment of the poor by the rich. In short, promoters of the peace are to protect the vulnerable. This is immigrants, this is orphans, poor widows, and the like, people who cannot, at this present moment, have enough. We're to care for them. And Jesus is fueled by all of these influences, which leads us to today's text. He recruits Matthew. He sees Matthew. Child of God, tax collector, wealthy, interesting. Matthew introduces Jesus to a whole passel of tax collectors. And the Pharisees don't get it. They just see the tax collectors as sinners. What is all this? Of course, Jesus sees them as something greater than sinners, but he sees them as a power that can change the world. Now, to underscore this, I want to just mention Luke chapter 19. And this is where Jesus goes to Jericho, and there's this guy, this short little rich tax collector named Zacchaeus, who is up in a sycamore tree, waving at Jesus. And then Jesus says, Zacchaeus, get down off that tree. They go into Zacchaeus' house, and what do? Well, they have a meal. And what happens to Zacchaeus? His life is completely changed. He falls on his hands and knees and says, I am so sorry for gouging people. I am so sorry. And he promised to make restitution and change his ways. So this is what we're talking about. Now, the question becomes, so Jesus had a plan. He understood what he could do. He's not going to fight Rome. That's too much. Let Rome have what Rome has. He's not telling the tax collectors not to pay Rome. He's just saying quit gouging the people, eh? Now, so the question then becomes, what does it mean for us? And looking at modern day references, I think the best one I can point to in terms of this idea of redistribution of wealth based on oppression, it occurred 70 years ago. It's called the Civil Rights Movement. It was launched. It was exclusively inspired by Jesus Christ. Everything I'm talking about here. They knew the 3,000 verses, I'm going to tell you that. And so what it was trying to do is apply Christian ethics to social problems. And that's what we're always invited to do. Take Christian ethics. What do we know? What did Jesus teach? And how do we apply that to the world in which we live today? Where are the gaps? Where's the low-hanging fruit? Now, fact of the matter is, if you think back to the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement, I don't know what church you were going to, but the church I was going to didn't embrace Martin Luther King. Not many did. Not many did. There was a big pushback, to be sure. Eventually, things change to an extent, and that's good. But the same voices that I heard resonating against the civil rights movement are the same voices that are being lifted up today. Exactly the same. There's been a resurrection of pushback against economic justice. Now, Jesus said, and those members of the civil rights movement took this very seriously, he said, if you want to walk in my footsteps, you must attempt to fulfill the peace, which includes justice. You're supposed to do that. And it's interesting, as a called and ordained pastor of the Church of Christ, I am actually commissioned to preach out against injustice. It is expected of me. And it's the only thing that's truly expected of me. Well, maybe not the only thing, but it really, really comes out strong. I guess the people that expect it of me are aware of these 3,000 verses and how important it is. Sadly, I know there are many strong voices in the world that try to say racism is not real, it's all been fixed, and if people are using that as an excuse, it's a lazy thing, blah, 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 blah. And the poor are poor because they don't get off their duffs. And there are very strong voices that promote this type of stuff. And a lot of them claim to be Christian. I don't know. I do know this. Before Jesus died, he warned his disciples. He says, beware of false prophets that say stuff in my name. Beware, because they're going to come. But then he would say, by their fruits you will know them. And when Jesus talks fruit, he means compassion, mercy, justice, forgiveness, and grace. That's what Jesus means. And it was counterculture then, and it's counterculture today. So, where do we go from here? What do we do? What is the low-hanging fruit? Well, there are 44% of the people employed in the United States are paid below a livable wage. 44%. That's a big number. That's a big number. 44%. And they are generating wealth and being paid below a livable wage. So, I want to underscore once again, because I've heard pushback on this, what I'm talking about, nobody is suggesting everybody gets paid the same. That is a ridiculous thought. Bah. What we are saying is all people should be paid a livable wage. Period. You can make more. You can do whatever you want, but my goodness gracious, let's make sure that the least of these are taken care of and encouraged to grow. When you don't have enough, just like back in the day, your health suffers, mental and physical. If you don't have enough to eat, if you don't have proper health care, if you don't have proper education, proper transportation, all that stuff, if you don't have that in this world, your body diminishes. And I will tell you, and I know Sue can talk to this, I remember when I was doing my clinical work at a Detroit hospital, Sinai, and the people I saw there were definitely from the poor. And they looked generally 30 years older than their chronological age. It was breathtaking. So, it brings us back to the great commandment to love the Lord your God, your neighbor as ourselves. It's okay. You have permission by the Church of Christ to advocate for the poor. It's okay. It's truly okay. Remember, too, Jesus said you will have the poor with you. Not that he liked it, but he knew the way things work. So it's a call to every Christian that has more than enough. And we all define that in our own way. But more than enough means I'm truly not worried about my survival. I got survival down cold. And I have some quality of life. And that's peachy too. But what is enough? Everyone has to figure that out. But to become hope for the hurting, as Jesus did 2,000 years ago, we have to realize that the torch has been passed to us. Our teachings, the teachings of Christ, have been passed to us, and some of those teachings are really, really hard and radically unpopular. But Jesus would say, wouldn't he? All the time he said, what does he say? He says, fear not. I know I've given you a tough assignment, but fear not, just go out and do it. It's going to be okay. So, in closing, low-hanging fruit, tax collectors of our day, it's not the IRS, it's really not. That is kind of fun. It's not truly the IRS. But easily I can point to all politicians. This is nonpartisan. I could care less when representing the poor. Nonpartisan, All politicians should be asked the question of an earnest Christian. What do you propose to do to lift up the poor? That's what I'm interested in. You see, you don't have to, Mr. Politician, tell me how you can give me more. I already got enough. I didn't fall off a turnip truck. You're just trying to get my... I understand that, but what I really want to know, since I already have enough, I'm looking at my poor brothers and sisters here. What are you going to do? That's the low-hanging fruit. We have the power to get a message out to all politicians, regardless of their party, and see this as a human rights issue. And of course, there's pushback. There'll be some inflation, and there's this and that and the other thing, but there's always going to be excuses. And those excuses are usually short-term. Okay, yeah, there's going to be some more automation as a reflex. I understand all that. But the power of God's love working through us can make a huge difference. So, in closing, this is not easy, but I'm excited. And I hope you're excited too, because I know we have an answer to these problems. And we have a guide in Jesus who can teach us how to do this stuff. And we can be proud of that and excited about that. And we don't have to, whatever. I mean, parties, whatever they are. But human rights issues should not be partisan. And so I invite you to take that next step. Amen.